From Sigma Woman, this is the Business for Aligned Women podcast. I'm your host, Clara McKay, your aligned business coach and advocate for all things showing up for your vision. This is a no BS space for brave-hearted women who are actually craving change. I'm dedicated to bringing women's visions into reality, equipping women with all they need to build an abundant future, and shutting down all of the ways that you keep yourself small. Here, we're all about a women-centered approach, non-negotiable value alignment, and making bank without compromising your well-being. Each week, you're already one step closer to your most aligned and abundant future. We have such an educational and nourishing episode today with Emma Brinkman of Ebb and Flow. She is an embodiment guide and somatic menstrual cycle mentor. She's all about using the wisdom of the body to establish ease and vibrancy. And we're going to go into that in a second. I just want to do my little housekeeping. I always try to give you something free in these episodes, and I was going to share with you my Cycle Syncing for Business guide, and I checked out Emma's Instagram and saw that she has a free cycle tracker. So I have a free Cycle Syncing for Business guide, and Emma has a free cycle tracker. So you could download both of those and use them together to really support you in building your cycle awareness and setting up your schedule in business so that you're not operating against your energy, which Emma and I talk about a lot in this episode. I did also want to remind you that I have spaces for resonant and aligned branding. It's sustainably priced, it's very well organized, and you're going to get what you need to make especially showing up online so much more easy and easeful and just take a lot of the stress out of it. You can apply for that in the show notes as well. I'm going to read a little bit of feedback that I got from Hannah, who is a birth preparation guide, and we're talking about that easefulness in making content with her feedback. So Hannah said, I never thought it was possible to make 50 plus Instagram posts in a month, create a course and everything that comes with it, and establish all the back end stuff. But she did, and she has. This coaching has supported my business and life mainly through the use of structures, plans, and strategy. This keeps business and my personal life more separate, which feels a lot more sustainable and freeing. Cue the angels. All of the work done to get super clear on what it is I am creating and exactly who I'm serving is a big and important pillar that I come back to over and over again. And I just want to highlight, isn't it funny that creating parameters and structures and systems and plans and strategy, the energetic response to that is I feel like my energy is more sustainable and I feel more free. I'm just going to leave that there for you girlies who don't like plans because you don't think it gives you the freedom. Freedom comes from not needing to do things on the fly anymore. All right. So this episode is going to give you a lot of information. I think a lot of you are going to resonate with it and relate to it. We talk about doing business as a woman, like a woman. And what I mean by that is with our cyclic natures and with our menstrual cycle, if we have one, and how working against that is probably not helpful. Enjoy and make sure you take some notes on this one and really implement them because it's these little tweaks that make the biggest difference. Emma, it's so nice to have you here. Could you please introduce yourself and your work to the audience?
Of course. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me. I love your podcast and your work has been really supportive for me. So I'm excited to have this conversation together. My name is Emma Brinkman, and I'm the creator of Ebb and Flow. I educate women about the menstrual cycle and the female body and how the energies of our cycle affect all areas of our lives as women. I started Ebb and Flow because I believe that most women are stressed out from living against the natural rhythms of their cyclical body. And we aren't taught about the hormonal cycle as women, but the female body constantly changes according to our hormones. And when we ignore or live against these hormones and the natural rhythms of our body, we experience cyclical symptoms, exhaustion, burnout, and various challenges within our bodies. So my project, my vision is to support women to come back into alignment with their body and work with the energies of their cycle in order to live with greater ease, vitality, confidence, radiance, and flow.
Beautiful. I love it. I'm so glad that you're here as well. I would love just for you to go a little bit deeper into that affects all areas, because I think something that happens is when people hear about menstrual cycle, this or that, they kind of silo it in their own experience and be like, oh, well, I can't really be bothered working on my menstrual cycle, or that's just another thing, or it's not a priority. But can you talk a little bit about how this actually impacts, at least a few different areas in your life?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question because it can seem kind of extra or so niche that why do we need to care about that when we have real world issues? So I would say that the menstrual cycle is the template for our lives as women. And we have a hormonal cycle that changes each and every day and affects our lives on a daily basis throughout the whole of the month. So when we talk about the menstrual cycle, we're not just talking about our periods, we're talking about from day one of our periods to the end of our cycle before we begin to bleed. And our energies, our emotions, our moods, our brain, our stress levels, everything changes according to where we are and what phase we are in our menstrual cycle. And knowing how the energies of our body and our hormones change each and every day throughout the cycle really helps us understand what's going on in our bodies. And when we understand what's going on in our bodies, we can align our lifestyle choices, our diet, our self-care, our work, our productivity, creativity, all these various facets that make us women that help us to thrive. We can actually align them to the phases of our cycle in order to gain greater vibrancy, greater ease, less stress, and really live a much more holistically aligned life.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think so many of my community, like ease and radiance, are really big desires that they have, whether or not they've worked that out yet or they've realized that yet. Those two things are really important. And I do a little cycle syncing, a really top level cycle syncing thing in my gentle business program. And one of the biggest things that people get interested in, or it's kind of a bit of a light bulb moment, is that the way we kind of think and the way we process and our tendencies with our thoughts change according to our phases. And that can really affect a business, you know? So I just wanted to get your opinion on that, the lens through which we see the world changing in each phase.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that before I had this knowledge, you can kind of be at the whim of your hormones in a way that you don't understand what's going on within us, within our brain, within our mind, within our relationships, because we aren't in tune necessarily with the nuanced ways that our bodies, minds, and spirits change throughout the cycle. So the way that I have found that my cycle supports me in my business, or the way I show up differently in each phase in my business, is starting with the menstrual phase, which I also refer to as inner winter. It's a really dreamy, introspective, and visionary time for me. So in my business, I use that time for planning and visioning for the month ahead and maybe some business development. In the follicular phase or inner spring, for me, that's a time when my brain and my spirit wants to experiment and play, and my energy starts rising. So I capitalize on that in the business by doing forward-facing content and creating more and allowing my creative juices to flow. The ovulatory phase, which I also refer to as inner spring, for me is a time when my communication flows much more effortlessly. So I might create more content at that time or write in really important tasks that feel like I really need to be pointed with my communication, schedule things such as this interview. And then in the luteal phase or inner autumn, my energy starts to wane, and it is a time for discerning tasks such as bookkeeping, more introverted tasks, writing blogs, and anything that requires real focus and discernment. So that's how my body and brain works for my business throughout the cycle.
Yeah, beautiful. I always say to people to really watch if you plan to do that front facing content in the first half of your phase, and there's a little part of you that says don't do it in that, put it off, like do it next week, do it next week. You have to really be disciplined around that, because if it doesn't happen in that first part of your cycle, it probably will not happen that month, you know?
Totally, totally. I have had months where if I don't get something done in the phase where it really is best suited to sync with, it gets pushed off a whole month. And then, we're struggling with consistency.
Yeah, consistency. And then I think it really feeds into low self-worth a lot as well. And just to close out on this, because I know we have other questions that I want us to get to, a really big part of this with my clients is sometimes if I have a client who's really struggled with consistency and they've got very low confidence, we'll generally find that they've been to go completely against their cycle. So they've always been telling themselves that they're going to have a big content week when they're getting their period. And then it's kind of like, well, if that's what you keep doing to yourself and then you keep not doing it, and then the month ends and once again, I haven't done it, no wonder you have really low self-confidence, because you never build that self-efficacy and self-respect of knowing that you can get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, this is why menstrual cycle awareness is so eye-opening for many women, is because if we are just essentially what you're describing is pushing against the natural rhythms of our bodies. And if we're doing that, well, of course, we're going to struggle with low self-worth in business, but we're going to struggle with low self-worth in all areas of our lives, because we are essentially working in such a way that we're constantly essentially facing an uphill battle. And I think that causes a lot of low self-worth, body image issues, all those things.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think both your work and my work, it is effort, right? We're getting people to make changes in their lives, but both of our work produces more ease in the long run.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
if
Yes.
you go against your cycle each month, or if you are inconsistent or whatever in your business, like the long-term impact of that is the opposite of ease. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of my audience, sometimes they use the word freedom or they use the word spaciousness, but really what they do mean is an easeful experience. But to get back on track, I know that you're a somatic menstrual cycle mentor. I feel like my listeners will have a pretty good idea on the menstrual cycle mentor part of it, but could you explain the somatic part to us?
Yes, of course. So as a somatic menstrual cycle mentor, I combine the practice of menstrual cycle awareness with other body-based tools and technique that essentially guide women back into this more easeful, loving relationship with their bodies. I have a lot of experience, many years working with somatic or body-based tools and practices myself, especially dance and intuitive movement. So with my clients and with my work, I incorporate a lot of these somatic practices, what you might call embodiment practices, with the menstrual cycle awareness component, the cyclical living and cycle syncing component, because essentially I really believe that when women connect with this embodied experience of living, paying attention to their bodies from the inside out, that's when they can live with less stress, greater ease, as we've already discussed, and step into a more vibrant and empowered life. Essentially, as a somatic menstrual cycle mentor, I believe my role is to support women to use their own bodies and their cycles to guide their lives back into a place of greater alignment, ease, and flow.
And I imagine that for your clients, this is probably a pretty big learning curve. It might be a little bit difficult at the beginning just because it's all this new stuff. But when I hear you talking about it, it sounds like once we get over that initial hurdle of integrating all these new things, it becomes a very intuitive way of being in the world. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And that is for me the goal. I feel that as a mentor, my goal is to guide women back into relationship with their own bodies and intuition. And when we start to live from more interior embodied space rather than according to external expectations and obligations, I think we naturally start to step into living from a more intuitive aligned place. So absolutely, that's the goal of my work.
And I love that. And I'm so big on in every single area of life, let's move away from taking our indicators from external sources and just start tapping into what we really want or what we really need in the moment. So I love that. And I did just want to signpost, that the many years of experience that you have with dance and intuitive movement and the processing part of things, because I think there are a lot of people out there who are maybe doing this kind of work or it's a popular thing at the moment, but I think there aren't very many people who have a lot of experience and years experience under their belt facilitating this kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. It's for sure a passion and lifelong, well, I should say adult lifelong. Since I started menstruating and was a teenager, I've been really honestly invested in the work of the body and embodiment. So it's really an honor and a privilege to share it with more and more women.
Yeah, and it's just a bit of a point of difference to find someone doing this kind of work who does have that long under their belt with it, which I think people should know and be aware of. So, what is one thing, and I know it's probably quite hard to land on one thing, but what's one thing that you wish all women knew about their cycle?
Yes, it is hard to nail on one thing. But if I had to choose one thing, I would narrow it down to the fact that I believe that as women, we must slow down in our luteal phase, which is the second half of our cycle after ovulation, and rest to the extent possible while on our periods. And I say this because that is the body's prerogative in that phase of the cycle. And our patriarchal masculine culture has programmed us to believe that it's unnatural to slow down, that we must grind away day after day, and that the epitome of success is how much we accomplish. I know you talk about this all the time. It's internalized patriarchy. I lived by this programming myself for far too long. So for me, menstrual cycle awareness and this opportunity to deeply listen to the intelligence of our bodies and cycles and really truly start to honor her needs, especially for slowing down and rest when necessary, which for most women is in the second half of their cycle. I think that can naturally solve a lot of cyclical symptoms, exhaustion, even burnout. I've seen it in my own experience and in the work with my clients. So if I could communicate this one thing, it would be, first of all, start tracking your cycle, get to know it more intimately, and pay attention to when your energy is waxing and waning. That's why my business is called Ebb and Flow, so that we can literally start listening to the rhythm, the ebb and flow, the waxing and waning of our bodies. And if your body, like most women in the second half of the cycle, because of the hormonal changes, if you start to notice that your energy is dropping, well, try your very best to honor this. And I know we all live extremely busy lives, very connected lives, but even just doing 1% less or shifting in these small ways to lessen our load in that part of our cycle can really support us in living that easeful, rested, resourced life that we've been discussing.
I think the key word there is resourced. And if like, some people might not understand what we mean by that, but we mean having stuff in the tank, having energy. Because I think probably the biggest excuse that I hear from my clients is I'm just so tired, I'm just so exhausted. And I think there's a lot of reasons for why people are experiencing that. But do think there's a big part of real rest isn't actually happening. So lying on your
Yeah.
back on TikTok is not like that's fine. And it's something, I'll give myself 10 minutes of that as an indulgence, but it's really not resting on the nervous system level, which I think a lot of women struggle with.
Yes, absolutely. And I one time heard this adage of rest is not the same as relaxation, right? Or relaxation is not the same as rest. And I really try to remember that when I'm on my period, I am resting. I'm not just scrolling. I'm not just chatting on the phone with my legs up. I'm truly resting in order to really resource myself for the cycle ahead.
Yeah, I know for myself to truly rest, and I don't know if it's part of autism and because we have a thing about being perceived, but actually needing to be completely offline for more than 24 hours a week, at least 3 days
Mhm.
a week, really for me is when I can really full body properly rest. But I just wanted to share with any listeners if they have an aura ring, because I know that you mentioned the tracking, and just this morning it just sent me a big study that they've been doing on women's health and pre-menopause, perimenopause, and menopause and postmenopause. They've done this massive study, and the aura rings detecting ovulation and predicting your period and everything. So if you already have an Oura ring or if you've been thinking about getting one, they're doing really amazing work actually with the data that they're getting from the ring. So if you are looking to track your cycle, I think that's a good one to do it with. I just did have one little question about this one suggestion, and this question might be a bit too niche, but I'm thinking for myself, and I have had this feedback when I talk about cycles with my clients in my Gentle Business program. Myself and other women who may be either diagnosed with PMDD or maybe probably have PMDD and are getting those symptoms. So for a lot of us, we feel really trashed, like ovulation to menstruation. We just feel really low energy, really fatigued. And personally, I'm working out, I'm doing my own things, but I know I've had conversations with clients who don't have a method to manage this. And then as soon as we bleed, we get tons of energy. And it's like we haven't had any energy for 2 weeks. So we've been really operating at like a 10% or a 20% for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden we finally have energy. And there's a little bit of scarcity mentality there of like, well, I've got it now, so I have to use it while I've got it. Do you have any piece of advice for women who are dealing with that, who feel like, oh, okay, I have to rest while I'm bleeding, but I really feel like I've been resting for 2 weeks and this is the only time when I feel like I have energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that honestly, what my recommendation would be is to listen to the wisdom of your body. If your body is telling you to rest in the 2 weeks prior to your period, well, then the most important thing for you to do in order to ease some of those PMDD symptoms would be to slow down at that time. I can relate to this scarcity mentality of, okay, if I think we could all relate to that. If you've been sick and then all of a sudden you feel better, it's like, oh, I got to catch up, right? But my advice for getting that burst of energy as soon as you start bleeding would be to just pace yourself. My teachers, I studied all of this work with the Red School, and my teachers at the Red School really talk a lot about pacing, especially as we move from menstruation into the inner spring, the post menstruation time. So if you have energy, just don't necessarily, and I don't like to tell people ever what to do and not do. So take this with a grain of salt. And obviously, the big lesson here is to listen to your body, not those external sources telling you, okay, I got to get this done on my to-do list, and really pace yourself as you come into the next cycle. You feel your energy rising. I know a lot of women with PMDD actually develop those symptoms in the second half of their cycle because they've pushed too hard in the first half of their cycle. So I think that it can be really challenging to maybe accept for a time while you're healing PMDD that your capacity is just a little bit less, but to not try to get everything done on day one and maybe insert pockets of rest or insert a slower way of approaching whatever you weren't able to do in those 2 weeks prior to menstruation. Just take sort of a gentle approach. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, just be kind of gentle on both ends. And yeah, it's a real doozy because even if, like, I'm always wondering, oh, maybe I would have more energy if I did fully just completely rest during my period. And I've definitely had years of doing that. But sometimes it's like, oh my God, I finally feel good. So it's really hard to balance it out. Introducing Sigma Studio for aligned, considered, and resonant branding. We create beautiful and functional brands. We're offering branding for women-led businesses and creative endeavors. It's sustainably priced and via the strategic lens of a business consultant with over 5 years experience. We will visually speak directly to your ideal client. We've taken the time to listen and understand what you need to make running your business and creating content easeful. We give you everything you need and don't ask you to pay for anything that you won't actually use. We make beautiful, intentionally positioned brands that resonate with you and your clients to help you step into your highest power and grace as a business owner. Is there maybe just one last tip for specifically women who own businesses for working with their cycle and how that might benefit their business?
Yeah, absolutely. I know I kind of already went into how I work with my cycle in my business or work with my business in my cycle. But I would probably say that first get to know your cycle and start to understand the energetics of your cycle. And as you track your cycle, I recommend to my clients, at least initially, to track your cycle in a really simple way. And that could be noting the day of your cycle. Day one is the first day of your period, for those who aren't aware. And then just a couple of words to describe how you're feeling that day as a super beginner cycle awareness practice. And as you do this over a number of cycles, you'll start to notice probably some trends. Like there might be a day when you feel really creative, for example, or when you feel really outgoing. And I would say for women in business that as you start to track and get a sense of really getting a sense of like this, I know it sounds a little woo woo, but like the superpowers of each phase of your cycle, you actually can become more productive by channeling those powers of each cycle phase. So yeah, my number one advice is just get to know your cycle, get to know how you show up throughout the 4 phases of your cycle, and then start implementing small shifts to align the tasks that you have over the course of the whole month with the energies and the superpowers of each cycle phase.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's like with our coaching, I get people to do an aligned schedule and we put it in Google Calendar. And that's something I love to use because as you're learning more about your moods and your phases, and we're definitely never advocating just dropping the ball on everything, but you can just drop and drag in Google Calendar if today isn't the day for that task, or you really feel like you're tapping into a power that would be better for this thing that you had booked in for next week. And I also, because it's rare that I get to really talk about this stuff, so bear with me. But I think looking at the superpowers is one thing, and it is really helpful, and I think we should do it. But another thing that I think is really powerful is almost looking at the kryptonite of that phase. So we have what we're so great at and what we can tap into and tune into, but also I think there's things that we really need to be very conscious to watch out for. So I've had this experience on multiple occasions and it never fails to totally floor me when I will have a call with a client and they will literally say things to me like, I have never felt this confident and directed in my vision. I have never felt this empowered in my business before in my whole life. This is amazing. Da, 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 da. 7 days later, same person, same business, nothing has changed apart from their cycle. And they will come in and be like, I'm just really questioning everything. I think I need to do something completely different. I'm going to like totally pivot. I'm going to undo all the work that we've done over the last 10 weeks. I'm going to redo stuff. And I'm just like, sweetie, you need to not be thinking about your business right now when you're on your period or right before you get your period. If you don't feel good mood wise, and that maybe is related to hormones, or if something else is going on in your life that's really affecting your mood, that's not when we should be thinking about whether we should be pivoting our business, you know? So, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, as speaking of kryptonite, what I think I really identify you saying that is so true for me and all the women that I work with is specifically this, excuse my French, but like this damn inner critic that comes up, especially in the late luteal phase. And that's the time in our cycle when we're the most self-critical, when we are the hardest on ourselves. And if we don't know that about our cyclical nature, well, then that's when we're going to make these rash decisions in our business or in our personal lives or in our relationship and rock the whole boat on a day when it's really just, we need to, actually be extra gentle on ourselves and acknowledge the presence of the inner critic, but not necessarily heed their voice. And that honestly was one of the most, I think, life-changing things for me when I first started practicing cycle awareness many, many years ago, was just really because I struggled with body dysmorphia for a long time as a dancer, really became acutely aware of where in my cycle this shit voice of not enough and real inner criticism was coming up, and it was always coming up, in the same phase. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because just understanding that can be really permission giving for a lot of women. And it can really, I think, take the pressure off us to be the same every day, and to acknowledge that there are just some days when we're going to have lower energy and low self-esteem. And just by knowing that that's even a possibility, I think that can help build our self-esteem.
Yeah, totally. And I always say, let yourself have a bad day without needing to write a thesis about it. We don't need to know why. We don't need to know all this stuff. We don't need to know the trauma root from when we were two. Maybe you just feel like shit today, and that's okay. And just let it be that. Ideally, we want to get to a point where we don't acknowledge that inner critic, and we go, not to bypass yourself, but to be self-aware enough to be like, I'm just getting my period. I feel like shit. I'm not going to think about that right now.
That is essentially, I think, what I mean when I say acknowledge. I don't mean listen to the inner critic and pay attention to their messages and use that to guide my life. I just mean, okay, this is where I feel like shit, and that's okay. And this is where I might experience some bumpiness, and that's okay. And, so be it.
And I want to be a little bit spiky to the audience here, in that I know a lot of the women that engage with me self-identify as self-aware. They really would self-identify as self-aware people. And when it comes to mood throughout their cycle, they are not self-aware at all. If you want to be a self-aware person, I think this cycle tracking, but specifically around moods and modes of thinking, needs to come into play.
Absolutely. Yes, I couldn't agree more.
It's like next level self-awareness. I just wanted to say there's a lot of business coaches out there, and I've had feedback from my clients around this, who are really into hustle and work very hard and work very long hours and just push it and get up at 5 a.m. every day and do a sauna and an ice bath and then go to 75,000 meetings in a day and work late on the computer. And I just want to say that if you see that, because that can be really appealing, it can be very motivating when you see that. But please look and ask yourself how old those women are who were doing that and who were suggesting that for people. And I want you to know that that might be okay in your early 20s or even in your whole 20s, but it will catch up with you in your 30s and 40s. And we want to be doing business in a way that is supporting our hormones, not disrupting them. Even simple things like not working at night on a bright computer without blue light blocking or even red lens glasses. We want to be doing business in a way that's going to give us that longevity, and supporting our hormones as women business owners is a really big part of that.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more. And also, when you and I started working together, this was one of the reasons why I was drawn to your work, to be honest. You were talking about your cycle in your podcast and in your content. And it was really rare for me to see someone in the world of business coaching that was doing business in a cycle aligned way. And having set up my business from the start to be a cyclical business, it was really important to me and a real high value for me to work with someone that was prioritizing hormonal health and syncing our business to our cycles. So that was definitely something that drew me to you initially. And I really appreciate that we're having this conversation, that you're sharing it with your audience, and that you support women in understanding the way that our cycles affect our business and our energy and all the ways that we can show up when we start to really honor our hormones and our cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to finish up, I just wanted to check in. We did an Aligned Business Intensive way back at the start of this year. So it was quite a while ago. But if you had any thoughts on that, or could you take a moment just to reflect on that intensive and how it's helped you in your business?
Of course. Well, I'll just begin by saying that it was quite literally a transformational experience for me to go through that business intensive. Before we began, I had been running my business for about a year and a half. I feel like I was what you would call a baby business owner. And through that time, in retrospect, I was really treating it like a hobby, which I know that's something that you talk a lot about. I had been working a lot with women in person for many years through women's circles and these intuitive dance events and workshops. But the online component of my business, I was treating it more like a passion project. And I just really didn't have the tools or understanding of how to grow my online mentoring practice. So with you, there was just so much learning and growing, but the systems and automation tools and the general advice and support you gave me to put a plan in place to grow my business online and to do things in a systematic, intentional, and clear way have really been a game changer for me. I feel like we've talked a lot about ease here. And just having those systems in place brought me to a much greater level of ease and consistency in the business. And while we did have this intensive many months ago, I feel that since then, I've been showing up really consistently in the business, which has really increased my confidence and also helped me grow my following and develop offers and programs that just feel like they're in greater alignment with both the needs of my clients and this greater vision and long-term vision that I have for Ebb and Flow. So thank you. I really can't thank you enough for all the ways that you supported me and have helped me grow.
And no worries. It was an absolute pleasure. I just want to touch on that piece of going from the in-person circles to building, because we haven't talked about it, but you're an international digital nomad. Like, you're moving around. You don't have a solid place where you're going to be there forever. So moving to selling more online is super supportive of you. And I had a client yesterday send me a message saying that from doing that transition from like, she'll still do some in person sometimes, but relying solely on in person to some online, more passive income. She had 2 purchases, and the income that she made from those first 2 purchases was what she would have earned from running 4 circles with 16 women in each circle. So how many times do you need to convince someone to pay to have 16 women in 4 circles versus twice, and you're earning the same amount of money? Like, it's just crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's a whole different world when the money starts coming in.
Yeah, it is. It really makes such a difference. And I love the in-person, and there's definitely a level of connection, but the online world also facilitates so much richness and connection. And we have this opportunity. I mean, you and I are connecting across continents, and that to me is really beautiful and exciting about growing an online business as well.
And I would say if people really love doing in-person stuff and they don't want to remove that from their business, I would say just do it on a bigger scale. Instead of doing a once-off circle, do a 3-day retreat where you earn so much more money. And truly, the women who attend that retreat are going to have a way bigger transformative experience than they could get in a 2-hour circle. It's a win-win for everyone. So there's always ways and means to do these things in a more supportive way.
Yeah.
Last little question, where is the best place for people to start working with you? What offers do you have that people can jump into right away?
So if women want to dive in right away, I have lots of freebies available on my website and on Instagram. I have a guided menstrual meditation, a cycle journal, and a guide to aligning your self-care with your cycle, all of which are pretty entry-level offers to begin dipping a toe into the waters of menstrual cycle awareness and cyclical living. I also have a very affordable ebook workbook that essentially introduces women to the practices of menstrual cycle awareness, cyclical living, and this combination with feminine embodiment and somatics through gentle journal prompts, some guided practices, and a simple ritual. I'm a really big ritualist and I love incorporating ritual into all my work with women. So those would be some great places to start. I do offer online women's circles, one-on-one and group mentoring for women. So if you are looking to go deeper into the world of somatic and menstrual cycle awareness, those services are also available on my website as well.
Wonderful. We'll have it all linked in the show notes. So if anyone wants to connect with Emma or go and check out all of those different beautiful resources, you can just jump in there and have one click and you'll find them. Thank you so much for your time and all of your expertise today, Emma. It's lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
If you can't tell, getting to share this time with you is something that I find truly sacred. I know that you're busy, but if you've taken anything away from our time spent together today, could you extend the love and share this episode with a friend, your community, or on your socials? Tag me so that I can see it and I can share it too. Or when you have a spare moment, leave the podcast for review. These things cost you nothing and will mean so much to me. Let's get this resource into the hands of more women visionaries and help us collectively move towards our most aligned way of being and doing business together.